Welcome to Unleashed, the podcast where we redefine leadership by focusing on what truly matters, the people driving change. Change leadership is about guiding people through transformation in a way that inspires them to embrace change because they believe in it. Whether you're a leader looking to foster a culture of growth or someone eager to break through barriers in life and business, this podcast is for you. Now our host, Wendi.
Welcome to the Unleashed podcast. I'm your host, Wendi. Today, we're joined by Mike Maynard. Did I say that correctly?
That was brilliant. Absolutely perfect.
We're learning so much about last names. So, Mike, I'm going to tell our audience just a little bit about your bio. Mike is a seasoned B2B PR and marketing expert with a passion for technology and over 2 decades of leadership at Napier, one of the UK's leading specialist agencies. Mike's unique journey from engineering to strategic marketing has shaped his approach to measurable, impactful campaigns and fostering a strong organizational culture. So our listeners today are going to hear how Mike transitioned from Napier. I'm still not saying that right. Napier. I got it. Okay. To employee ownership, ensuring its legacy of innovation and commitment. So, Mike, I just want to welcome you to Unleashed.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast, Wendi. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And it's a little bit of a time difference there. So I know that Mike has a Chinese dinner that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, we have a company Christmas dinner. So, yeah, but no rush. We've got time.
Awesome. Okay. Well, walk us through your journey, your professional journey, Mike. How did you get to where you are, and tell us a little bit about the organization?
Yeah, so I kind of got here by luck, I think. It all goes back, when I was at school looking to go to university. I was pretty much up until I put the applications to university going to study maths, and I was going to be some kind of maths geek, and it was all going to happen. But I did a bit of amateur dramatics, and I did the lighting for the school plays and stuff. And one of the school teachers recklessly decided we could build our own lighting control system. And I enjoyed building it so much, I went into electronics and electronic engineering instead. Then moved in, did some electronics design at various companies, and then decided, I wanted something different. I wasn't necessarily great at the design, but I was great at talking about it. So I then moved into effectively a technical sales role, working for a semiconductor company, and then basically got the opportunity to move into marketing. And about 5 years after moving into marketing, the agency I was using, I was approached and basically asked, would you be interested in acquiring the agency, taking over the agency? And I thought, yeah, it can't be hard, can it, to really run an agency? So having never been in an agency in my life before, other than meetings, as a client, I thought, yeah, it sounds good. And that's how I got to Napier. So that was back in 2001. No planning in any of this, really. It was all spur of the moment decisions where I had opportunities, kind of those sliding door moments.
Mm. Well, I just find it so interesting as I was reading your bio and, preparing for this podcast. I think it's so rare that you have this engineering mind and you also have this creative mind and then this innovative mind of, some of the things that we're going to get into in employee ownership. So I think that's interesting. And how did those two things, your creativity and yet your technological mind, how did those things work together in an agency?
So it's really interesting because, all my friends who were and still are engineers will just be listening to this going, I don't understand what Wendi's asking, because engineering is inherently creative. And I think that's a big misunderstanding about engineering. It's very different from research and science, and it's much more creative. People are trying to create something new every day in engineering. So to me, I've never seen it as being anything different than just a natural progression. And yes, there are people in engineering who perhaps are less outgoing, less willing to talk to people, perhaps not ideal for marketing, but they're still creative. And I think that's something that really engineers are underappreciated for, is their creativity.
I've never thought about it that way. So that is so interesting because the people that I know who are engineers, I have a friend who's a digital engineer for Disney, and then I have a brother-in-law who is an electrical engineer, and I think of it more, you know, process oriented. And I've never thought about it from a creativity perspective. So you enlightened me today. So thank you for that.
No, and I think if you talk to them about their creativity, they'd love it. They'd love to be appreciated for it.
Well, that's going to change my conversations for sure with them. So, as you've walked along this journey of agency ownership and marketing and even the engineering side, are there some key moments where you have just said, "Wow, I'm in the right place"?
No. This is really interesting. I think most people, when they're going through their careers, there's things they want, there's promotions, there's things like that. And there's been all of that. But I think the problem is actually when you get what you want, you're suddenly in this position where you go, I'm not sure I can do it. And so I think, always I've taken jobs I've enjoyed, but whether you go, yeah, this is me, this is absolutely right, I want to do it forever. I don't know. I think that's a really hard place to be in. There's certainly,
Mm.
jobs I've hugely enjoyed. I mean, being in technical support, I loved. I loved talking about the technology to other engineers. It was fantastic coming up with ideas and solutions. I love being at Napier. I love the marketing side. But I think, always you're like, everything's changing. Things are going to be different tomorrow. And particularly if you come from an engineering background, everything's different tomorrow. But
Mhm.
actually, marketing probably changes faster than engineering. And so to imagine, yeah, this is the spot. It's never really where I wanted to be because I've always known if like I'm in the perfect spot tomorrow, I won't be because things will have moved.
Mm. Marketing changes quicker than engineering. Double click on that a little bit. What are some of the things that you're seeing in marketing that just are changing so quickly? AI, I'm sure, is going to be part of our conversation. I don't think we can talk about marketing without AI today. So what are some of
Yeah.
the things that you're seeing that are changing so rapidly?
So, I mean, I started in marketing, and I used social media. This was back last century. So, we're talking 30 years ago. I used something called Usenet, which nobody in the world who's like under 50 will have any idea about. And it'll only be engineers over 50 who know what Usenet was. And literally, there were conversations on there that are very much like social media, but there were four people in the world having them. So it was very small, very, very, very different. And if I wanted to reach engineers, other than those four people on Usenet, I then did postal mailers and we advertised in print
Oh
magazines.
my goodness, we barely had the
Um, you know,
internet 30 years ago, right?
yeah, there
Oh,
was there was very little internet. I mean, I remember, and this was actually, a little before I moved into marketing when I was an engineer. So I was with all these techie people, and I signed up for an email account. And I remember my boss, he was like, "But why would anyone ever use email when they've got fax?" And I was like, no, email's going to be big. Trust me on this. Unfortunately, I never had a bet. I should have placed a bet. But so I think, marketing's seen all these changes, often driven by engineering. But, the idea of social media being four people on a very geeky internet group to being the whole world, no one expected Usenet to grow to the whole world. No one was doing digital marketing back, in 1995, really. And now that's pretty much what everybody's doing. It's the mainstream. So I think the change has been massive, whereas the change for engineering has been more incremental.
mm. So now in digital marketing, you do a lot obviously with social media. How are you seeing that changing?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is that I mean, I'm focused on the business to business sector. That's where we work. That's our expertise. Those are where our clients are. So actually, social media for us is a little bit different for consumer agencies, and for us, it's really LinkedIn. And of course, the big thing about LinkedIn is it's actually now become a social platform.
Mm.
And even 10 years ago, nobody thought it was a social platform. It's where you put your CV and waited for recruiters to give you a better job. Um, and now it's not. Now it really is a place where people engage, they're getting work done. It's a very different place. So I think, that's been a massive change for us. And it's been really exciting, but it is very specific. It is very unique to B2B. We do some work on other platforms, of course, but it's much less of a major part of our overall marketing mix.
Okay. So dig into Napier a little bit and tell us about what it is that you do, because I'm not sure I have an understanding of exactly what that looks like.
So basically, what we do is we take complex technical products and we explain them and explain them in the way that's going to make them sound attractive to people who are geeky engineers. And that's pretty much our goal. So we're explaining the complexity to people who make technical decisions. Obviously, we're also talking to, senior managers who are non-technical and, but always dealing with these complex technical products. And our great strength, our expertise is really being able to explain benefits clearly for products that are quite difficult to understand.
So walk me through an example of that, Mike.
So, I mean, there's so many different things that you can look at. But a really simple example might be something called a motor drive. So, motor drives are really simple. You can plug a motor and basically, put the mains across it, the motor will turn if it's the right sort of motor. But if you have something called a motor drive, you can do all sorts of magical things. You can change the speed of the motor. You can make the motor accelerate slowly rather than just turning on straight away. And that has huge benefits because it saves enormous amounts of energy. So it's much more environmentally friendly. It protects the motor, and it also avoids like having all this really loud noise. A bit like if you've got an old car and you start the car, and I'm going to show my age because I mentioned a radio. But if you had the AM radio going, you can hear the noise of the motor through the radio because it's generating interference. So you've got all these massive benefits. And all it is basically is a box between the electricity supply and the motor. And it's really important. But then you talk about those different sort of boxes. And some of them are small, pretty much desktop computer size. Some of them are basically big cabinets that go across a wall. And they can turn incredible things. They can do things like, for example, in London, we've got the London Eye, a major tourist attraction. They can turn the motor of the London Eye. And so they're really, really cool. They're much more efficient. They save loads of energy. And they're a great product. But you've got to explain that to people who are experts in that sector, and they want very specific technical information about the motor drive, and you've got to explain it to like their boss's boss, who really doesn't care until you say we're saving you loads of money and actually you'll look very green and environmentally friendly, and suddenly they get interested.
So your client would be the technical client that is selling to another business.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. And just like, benefits sell, features don't. So you've got to be able to, I'm going to say, get really, really specific to the people who need all the specifics, but then you've also got to be able to talk to the person who goes, I don't want the specifics. I just want to make the money.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with our business is benefits sell and so do features, depending upon the audience.
Oh, isn't
So,
that the truth?
my very simple example might be that if you've got a motor that you want to turn and it requires a motor drive that can give you 10 kilowatts of power, you need to know that motor drive delivers 10 kilowatts of power. Um, and that's a feature. And you often see people in B2B tech marketing trying to call it an advantage, but it's a feature. It's basically, does this thing do this? And in a lot of technical stuff, it's important to talk about the features because it's a simple checklist. If it delivers 10 kilowatts, that's great, it'll work. There might be something on the voltage you supply. I mean, there was a time I worked for an American company, and we got shipped computers from America. And of course, they were all set to 110 volts. It's 240 volts in the UK. Fundamental feature, you need to make sure that it's set to the right voltage, whether it's your computer that you've just put under the desk, plugged in, it's gone bang, and the rest of the office has burst out laughing because they're all salespeople. You're the engineer and you blew up the computer. Or if you're trying to turn the motor for the London Eye, it all matters and they're all features. So for us, we've got to understand when to use features and when to use benefits. And that's really a big part of our skill.
Okay. So how does AI change what it is that you do? How do you use AI, or do you use AI at all?
So AI is fascinating. I think AI, to be honest, has been somewhat overrated by a lot of people. So speaking as an engineer, AI can do certain things incredibly well, and it can do a lot of things fairly poorly. So a great example might be if you're trying to analyze data from a digital campaign. So perhaps you've done something on LinkedIn, as I talked about, promoting ads, you want to do some analysis. AI can do some fantastic analysis just by typing things in English language. And you don't have to understand too much about the actual maths you're doing. It all gets done magically. And that's amazing. That's incredible. AI can produce, great ideas for different things to do. But actually, if you want to write an article about a motor drive, AI pretty much sucks. And it will produce a fairly good first article, but it will produce another fairly good second article that is almost exactly the same as the first, and a third that's almost exactly the same as the first too, because it's got very little training data, it's got very little variety in that training data, and it's
Mm.
not able to produce kind of that innovative, insightful information. And also, if you've just launched a brand new motor drive that's got a feature nobody else has, AI doesn't know about it. And AI is not the same as the way our brains work. AI is pattern matching. It's looking for patterns that it's been taught and reproducing them. And for some reason, our brains seem much better at dealing with new information than AI. So we've done a lot of testing with AI. We use AI. There's some fantastic uses. I mean, the number of people who are sat having to run Google Ads campaigns, they're trying to think up the headlines. It's a real writer's block moment for most people. AI is great for triggering ideas. And it might produce, in our sector, because it's specialist, maybe 10 ideas of which three are great, but those three are produced almost instantly. So what it's doing for us is really helping, but it's not taking away actually what our core skill is, which is understanding this way of communicating and understanding how to present these new features to people in a way that makes them exciting.
Mm. So you being a specialist agency, I can see how it would just be so much different because it does have the technical component. So that makes perfect sense to me. Are there any other technological innovations that you see coming on the horizon that are going to dramatically make it more make your work more efficient?
So it's really interesting. One of the things that actually excites me is data protection.
Mm.
And I think what's happened, as an engineer, every marketer's going to hate me for this. Please don't listen to this bit if you're a marketer. As an engineer, I came into marketing and I was quite surprised that, with digital, how many numbers were thrown out by people. And I was even more surprised by how little understanding there was between, either the people generating the numbers as maybe publishers, the people in the middle, the agencies, and the clients. They just looked at the numbers. And if the numbers looked bigger, it was better. And I think, what's happened particularly is people have been chasing these vanity metrics. And they felt that it's been good because there's been a relatively lax regime around privacy. So you kind of say, to Google, I want to run some display ads to people who look like these people who visited my website. And then you think everyone I'm showing ads to has got to be a potential customer. And the answer is no, because some people who come to your website are not potential customers. And once you expand that audience out with Google, which is not necessarily very effective when you look at really niche audiences, a lot of the people you're now talking to are not potential customers. But you look at the numbers and go, hey, we reached 100,000 people. And it feels good. I think the privacy is going to reduce that focus on number and size and make people much more focused on the audience that matters. And that's what really excites me. So we're going to see things like storytelling becoming more and more important rather than just hitting the same people over the head with the same message.
So Mike, you're in the UK, obviously, and it sounds like you're a global agency. Is that true?
Yeah, we work across the world, but particularly Europe and US.
Okay. So with privacy data, are you seeing differences from country to country? Like, how is it different in America than it is in the UK? And are there different trends?
Well, it's different from state to state in America. So, I mean, that's a really interesting thing. So, somewhere like California is pretty privacy forward, and they pretty much look like the UK. So, what we're seeing is actually what's happening is the countries or indeed the states that define the strictest privacy rules actually define the rules for the rest of the world. Because if you're a business and you want to do business in Europe as well as the States, you don't want to run a completely different approach to marketing in Europe to what you're doing in the
Mm,
States. You don't
hmm.
want to have separate databases. You don't want to have separate capabilities. You want it all to be scalable. And so what you're going to do is you're going to adopt probably the European GDPR regulations and just apply that across your whole database. And so more and more we're seeing that. I mean, I think my personal view is that a lot of marketers freaked out when GDPR first came in. And the younger listeners won't even, know about this. But privacy regulations started coming in, marketers were freaked out. It's like, we can't gather data, we can't do this. The answer is, firstly, actually, with these regulations, you can gather data. There are some restrictions, but for us in B2B, they're actually pretty lightweight.
Uh-huh.
But what you've got to do is have the right process, and you've got to let people who don't care about your message opt out one of the big things of GDPR.
Mhm.
That's fantastic. Why should I be wasting time sending emails to someone who isn't going to read it and then analyzing the data that says they didn't read it?
Absolutely.
It's ridiculous. So I actually think GDPR and the privacy regulations in general are a good thing. I mean, and there are certain items of privacy regulations that do cause problems that aren't so good, but
Mhm.
in general, it makes marketers think a bit, and that's not a bad thing.
Mm, could not agree more. So I'm going to change directions a little bit, Mike, and I want to go into something that I just think is incredibly interesting, and it's something that it seems like you do very well, if LinkedIn is to be believed. So, you have a very unique model, and it seems like you believe very strongly in employee ownership. Would you walk us through that journey and just how'd you get here? What does that look like?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I've actually got friends who are other agency owners in the UK, and they call me the communist. So, so there's definitely some interest in it. The reality is actually the way our agency ownership is set up, it's just incredibly capitalist. And it really is about making the agency successful. So the first thing is I didn't give the agency to the employees. The employees are actually buying the agency from me. And so their job is to basically own a business and make enough money to pay me the money they owe to buy the business. And then eventually they'll own the business. So it's effectively an earn out if you were doing a classic agency sale. It's just the same. The employees are doing that. So that's not a big difference, actually. The only real difference is who ends up owning the business. And if you sell to another agency, obviously another agency owns it, another agency boss. With employee ownership, the people who are actually doing the work are actually going to benefit in the results of that work. So the theory is, and my experience also, is that those people become a lot more motivated, partly because they recognize that the more successful they are, the more money they will earn. And there's a direct correlation. Um, but also to a large extent, and this probably reflects badly on me for the first 20 or so years I ran the agency, which is you have to be much more open in terms of company performance, what's happening, and people therefore are much more invested in the agency as well. They know what's going on. You're not sugarcoating things when things are tough, and you're having to pay people bonuses when times are good, and that's a great thing to do.
Oh my gosh, I just have so many questions. So, my consulting mind is just going crazy because, especially in this multi-generational workforce, that's one of the things that, people are asking for transparency. I think maybe we've always been asking for it. I think today more than ever, they want transparency. And I think there are some executives that are hesitant because exactly what you said. Oh, wait, do we really want to share our revenue? Well, what happens when you share your revenue and they make a direct connection between what they're doing and the revenue and they get something for it? Like, the most listened to radio station in the world is WIIFM. What's in it for me? So, wow, I just want you to dig into this even more. So how did you get to this point where you open your mind enough to go, hey, we are going to be transparent. I'm open to employee ownership. I know that it's going to be a win-win. What was that defining moment that you went, hey, this is a good idea?
Um, so it was a combination of things. I mean, like most things, there's not like one factor drives a decision. But there were a couple of things. Firstly, I was in an agency group. We were, getting help and support, one of these mastermind type groups. And we had someone come and talk about employee ownership and how you do it. And in the UK, the tax is a bit different to the US. So there's some clever ways to do it in the UK that actually work really, really well. There's also some terrible ways to do it that mean people pay enormous amounts of tax. So having that technical knowledge was important to go, actually, this is a really good benefit. But more importantly, I bought another agency and it went really badly wrong. And actually, I bought four agencies in my agency career. The first one being Napier, then we've acquired three others. And the middle of the three went very, very badly wrong. And I just went, I am not doing an earn out if I sell the agency and it goes wrong. I'm just not doing it. And so the way to prevent myself doing it is not to sell the agency to another buyer. So that was my decision. The truth is we can still sell the agency. I mean, it's one of the kind of views that, if all the employees own the agency, you're forever in this, kind of communist system. Absolutely not. The employees can go, do you know what? We're selling the agency, we're pocketing the money, and if we get fired, we'll live with it. And that's always possible. And now actually they have a lot of control over that. They can make those decisions.
So dig into that, because that was going to be my next question. Is that's one of the big challenges that I see in employee ownership is how in the world does a decision ever get made? What does that look like?
So, and again, this is a UK thing. In the US, it's slightly more difficult. But in the UK, it's very hard to give people shares without them incurring big tax bills. And we like tax in the UK, not as much as the Germans or French, but we still like a lot of tax. So, generally speaking, nobody wants to have shares that have a theoretical value, but it doesn't buy their, next house or whatever, because they have difficulty selling it. So we have something called an employee ownership trust. And so what actually happens is a trust buys the shares, and then anyone who works for the company is a member of the trust. So that means people move in and out of the company. They effectively own a proportion of the shares. They never physically personally own them, but they have a say over that proportion of the shares. And within that mechanism for employee-owned trust, the UK government, and all credit to the UK government, I'll be honest, our UK government's made mistakes. I'm sure the American government's made mistakes in the past. This has been a bit of genius. They set up a process where effectively the employees elect representatives. And so you have a board, and you have a board that has employees, and you have a board that has directors. And one of the most important things is me as the previous owner, I cannot control that board. So I don't have control. And that means the employees basically go to their reps, say, we want this. The reps then talk to on the board, and then we make a decision. And so it really is like having a board for the company that includes employees. And that's a bit of a German thing. Germans do that. It works really well in Germany. It actually works really well in the UK.
I'm just trying to picture this whole thing, and it just seems so logical. So why don't we all do it this way?
Well, there are some issues. I mean, the first is that typically people do this because they want to stay in the business and they want to realize some money. And they want to start a process of not necessarily exiting the business, but bringing on the next generation of management. So you're going to be in a business without necessarily a finite date to leave, where you don't have control and you used to own it. That's a big jump for people. That's like a
Yeah,
big, scary jump.
that's a huge jump.
So I'm in a business, I'm the CEO, I can run day to day. And the interesting thing is, because they're shareholders, they have the same rights as shareholders in any other company. So, I might own shares in Amazon, say. It doesn't mean I can go into Amazon UK and tell them what to do on a day-to-day basis. I basically can control, who are the executives, raise motions at the AGMs, things like that. So there is actually much less of the day-to-day interference than you'd imagine. But the other problem is the employees have basically got to fund the purchase out of profit. And there's some tax advantage in the UK that make it all slightly different as a calculation. But there is a bit of a feeling that what I'm doing is I'm giving the employees some shares.
Uh-huh.
They're going to take dividends, profits from those shares over the next few years. And those profits that I would have had if I kept the shares, they're going to use to pay me back. So where's the benefit for me? Because the employees are getting the money I would have had because I've given them the shares. And there's kind of a bit of a getting your head around it calculation there.
Hmm.
In the UK, it's great because there's certain tax benefits that actually make it easier to go, I can see the financial benefit.
Yeah.
But it is a leap of faith, and every so often these, employee-owned businesses go wrong, because employees make bad decisions, just like owners make bad decisions.
Hmm. Well, I would think the accountability would be different because people are taking on accountability because there is greater ownership. Yeah, I'm curious. What do you see as some of the benefits? Do you see higher productivity, more retention, more accountability that people take on with this kind of a model?
So I think one of the things that really changes is a lot of the conversations move from, I'm doing a great job, I deserve a pay rise, to the company's really successful, we all deserve pay rises. and I'm working harder than everybody else. And I deserve the biggest is normally the next bit that comes along. But fair enough. That's really good. And so people are thinking much more about the company as a whole and much less about their role as
Mm,
their first point of contact.
mm,
So I mean, I have to be honest. I mean, my fellow engineer is going to hate me for saying this, but I'm really not a fan of Elon Musk. But one of the things he said, and the marketers out here are going to scratch their heads at this, and the engineers go, I get it exactly, is he said, people are vectors, and a company is a sum of the vectors. And so what he's saying is a vector basically is something that has speed. So everybody wants to run fast in a company and go fast, but a vector also has direction. And actually, if you add two vectors together that are going really fast in opposite directions, you get nothing. And that's the point with companies. You've got to align people going the same way. And so, what in the employee ownership does is it helps with that alignment. And so, rather than people running off and effectively undermining each other or doing things that doesn't help, what someone else is doing, they're actually all running in that same direction. So you get that momentum together, and it makes the company much more effective. But it's really hard to put your finger on exactly what's changed. You can feel it, but everyone's just moved slightly more towards the way that the company as a whole needs to go.
So such a broader perspective than the me world, which is what I think most companies, the alignment, I think, that's one of the most common things that when I work with companies and they say we want to do teamwork, can you do a workshop on teamwork? The number one reason that there is a lack of teamwork is siloing and lack of alignment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we get people helping each other out. It's like we've got an issue here. We need to support this group over here, this team, because they're overloaded, they can't deliver, whatever. And so actually you've got, this really good incentive to make everybody successful because ultimately people can see that overall company success really benefits them. Whereas where you're in a company where you don't have any ownership, it kind of feels like it's only really your job that matters.
Yeah. Mm, so good. So, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about just different leadership styles. And is there a leadership style that this model would just not work for?
I That's an interesting one. I'm sure there is. I suspect that I'm finding this really hard because if you talk to anyone in the company, they'll say you're a control freak, Mike. And most owners of
Really?
most small businesses are control freaks. And I think the biggest problem is letting go of control
Yeah.
and trusting people. And I think that's a problem for most, small business owners when they're doing it. And obviously, the more towards, wanting control, the harder it's going to be.
Yeah. So, it sounds like I don't know. I think that it would be very difficult to be a control freak and do what you've done. And it sounds like you've done it so successfully. There would be some things that you would just simply have to let go of. So, are there some things that you've been enlightened by throughout this process that you're like, oh, I can actually let go of that and we're still alive?
Yeah, and I think that that's been a combination of the growth of the agency and also employee ownership because actually as you grow an agency or grow a business, you get more and more people and you get to the point where you can't be, you know, looking at what everybody does or knowing what everybody does. And so you suddenly get to the point where says to you, "Oh, this project we did over here for this, robotics client or whatever, that was fantastic. It went really well. The client's really happy. I just want you to know they're really pleased. And, we actually got better results than we said we would." And you as a boss are secretly thinking, you've never told me about this project. And that happens, I think, as part of growing a business. So one of the reasons I wanted to go to employee ownership was I believed it was the best way to keep the business growing as an independent business. And so is that employee ownership when I see that, or is that growth? The two are quite linked.
Mm.
But I think realistically, being too focused on controlling stuff ultimately stunts the growth of any company. And so you've got to let go.
I think that's one of the hardest things in leadership and management. I know, back in the day, it was a very long time ago, I was a manager and I just wanted to do everything for everybody. And the day that I actually realized that I could let go, I could go on vacation and things could actually get done, I think was a pivotal moment for me. So, um,
And, yeah, and I'm not very good at it. I mean, I can guarantee there are people listening to that clip, clipping it out and emailing it to me as we speak. So, it's like, I totally understand. It's a really hard thing for, I think, any small business owner to let go. And so we're all struggling with it.
Yeah, I would agree. So good. So Mike, you said a little bit earlier, and I want to take a deeper dive into it. You said that you had bought three additional agencies and there were some flops. So would you share with us, what was one of those flops? You don't have to go into detail, but what were the learnings that you have from that flop?
You could position all three as being a flop, in fact. I mean, you could almost position all four as being a flop because I bought Napier, and within a month, we'd gone from technology's the greatest thing in the world to dot-com crash being on the front page of every newspaper and all our clients cutting budgets. So, certainly the start of Napier was not a great start. I then bought a small agency, almost as a bit of a way to learn about acquisition. We wanted to use it to get into some new sectors. It didn't really work. It turned out to be a great acquisition. In terms of profitability, it was great. We brought some great people in, but it didn't really do what we intended to do. And the guy who sold me that, Peter Bush, was called Peter Bush Communications. He was the most fantastic, lovely person. Um, then we bought another agency, and really the previous owner just couldn't cope with selling an agency. He just couldn't cope with the fact he didn't own it, and we had huge arguments, and it was horrific. The earnout was terrible. I'm sure we were both, ticking off days on the calendar until the earnout ended. And then the last acquisition, we brought people in. Again, we got some great people in, so really positive talent. But we bought it for a specific client. So we had a client where we were doing they were doing some PR in the UK, and we thought this is a marquee client. We can grow this client. It's going to be amazing. And about a year after we bought that agency, the client signed a global deal in the US that wiped out every other agency, including us. And the people we worked with didn't even know it was going to happen. It wasn't like our contacts didn't want us. They were really happy, but as it happens with big companies, sometimes it fails. So all of those acquisitions had problems. I think very few acquisitions go smoothly. And people who tell you that, acquisitions are great and they're easy, they're lying to you. They're really hard.
Yeah.
You've got to get those people aligned. They've come from different backgrounds.
Hmm.
You've got to deal with different companies that are clients, different markets. It's really tough. So all of them flopped in some way. And I think, sometimes you rely on a bit of like just putting the blinkers on and going, I don't care how bad it is. I'm just going to get up and go to work and try and do my best.
Yeah.
And I know that it probably wasn't good enough yesterday because it didn't work, and it might not be good enough, but at some point we're going to break through it.
Hmm.
And I think that's what you got to do.
Yeah. So from those three flops, quote unquote, what were some of the learnings, or was it really just a timing thing?
I mean, I think, there's so many things you learn and there's so many details. So obviously you learn how to buy agencies. You learn that it's about the people. You learn that it's about the people, but you make bad judgments about the people. And sometimes you can't control individuals. You learn about culture. You learn what you care about with the culture. You learn what you don't care about. You're bringing people from agencies with different cultures to join your agency, and they bring good things and they bring bad things. And so you get to learn about that. And I think culture is a really big thing.
Mm.
And we've never taken this approach. We've probably taken far too soft an approach in terms of bringing the cultures together. But one of our clients, they said to me once, and they've done tens of acquisitions. It's a global business. And they said, it's really simple. The first 3 months, just crush the souls of the people who join. And what they meant by that was get those people and bring them into your culture. And if people are not going to sit with your culture, then get rid of them. It's got to be people who are bought in and prepared to invest in your culture. We tended to do that over a much longer period, but ultimately the reality is if people don't buy into your culture, they're going to leave. And you've got to accept that. So you've got to buy businesses where the majority of people you're buying in actually buy into your culture.
Mm. Well, and that would say we have to know what our culture is. And I think there are some organizations that, they don't have they have a strong culture. They just can't necessarily put it into words. And so it's very difficult to get people aligned with that culture. I worked with a large beverage organization, and they had merged, and they kept both CEOs. And there's benefit to that. I get that. And yet I'd have 100 people in my workshop, and I could literally say they're part of that one and they're part of that one. And they had been together at least 2 years
Yeah.
with two different,
Mhm.
both CEOs still there. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the dual CEO, we've never considered it, but I think, where I've talked to people who've run that system, what you've got to do is divide the responsibilities for the two CEOs. And one
Yeah.
CEO ultimately has got to be responsible for driving culture.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the interesting thing, you mentioned people don't know culture. You don't know culture. You think you know about culture, but really the culture of the company is what people say about the company when the boss isn't in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And by definition, the boss therefore has no idea what the culture is. So I think you learn a lot about your own culture when you buy other businesses and merge them in, because then you start saying, "Oh, this is interesting." I mean, we learn that actually we have a culture that is in some ways quite commercial. So, in the agency world, one of the big complaints about that agencies have is that clients will phone them up and go, "Don't know you can help me, but can we just spend, a few hours working on this problem?" And it's outside of scope. It's not what we've been paying for. And basically, if you want to be harsh, the client's saying, please, can you give me some free hours of free consultancy based on all your expertise, and I'm not going to pay you. And we were quite strict on that. And some of the other people we brought in were really lax, and they never argued about it. We were perhaps more transparent in terms of how much it actually costs us to deliver services than some of the other agencies we work with. So there was a certain transparency of price there, both in terms of, being honest about what it cost us and also about asking for money when we felt we deserved it. And those two are kind of linked. And that's a good thing. And we've tried to install that culture on the people who've come from other businesses.
Wow. Mike, I could just talk to you forever about your leadership approach, your knowledge, your wisdom. I don't know. I think whoever works with you is incredibly blessed, because I think I would follow you anywhere. You've got some great ideas. I think you're brilliant. So I would love for you to share with our listeners, what's one habit or mindset shift for our leaders who are listening? They want to build that strong culture. They want to build, whether it's intrinsic ownership or it's a model of ownership. What advice would you give to those leaders that are just going, wow, I have some work to do?
Hire people who are smarter than you. I mean, that's the easiest thing to do. If you get people coming in who are smarter than you, one of the first things that's going to happen is they're going to get all the problems they can't solve and give them to you. That makes you smarter because you're going to have to work out how to fix it.
Mm,
But it also, I think, being prepared to hire people who are better in different areas than you is really important. And again, it goes back to, when you're running a very small business, and I bought Napier and we were 7 or 8 people. So we were really small. And I could do pretty much every job. I can't do every job now. It's not practical. There's people with really specialist knowledge, and we've got people in who are absolutely amazing. They know way more than I do. And I think being prepared to do that, particularly if you're running a small business, is absolutely the most important thing, because otherwise you'll hold yourself back.
mm. Wise advice. So when you look back to your younger self, what would you say is one bit of unconventional feedback that you would give that might surprise others, that would have helped you to be more successful?
So this is an interesting question. I'm going to answer it in the way I do because I was an engineer. And so engineers, when they start out, they're very driven by work performance metrics. They believe everything is very measurable, it's very functional driven.
Hmm.
I would say network more. I was not great at networking, even when I first came into the marketing sector. But I think, engineers, and as I say, I've got lots of friends who are engineers, they're generally not great at networking. And that's pretty poor. There are some exceptions. I remember I used to go to Silicon Valley in the, sort of 90s when it was like the most exciting place in the world. And engineers there networked a lot and they were all talking about the latest advances and what they were doing. And there was so much information sharing. It was really exciting. And I think the more you network, the more you find out what's going on, what other people are looking at, what they're interested in, the better. You're going to learn a lot. It's harder when you're younger. That's the real issue. When you're a junior person, it's much harder to network than when you're senior. But it's certainly my advice to an engineer. And I would have freaked out as an engineer if I was given that advice.
Yeah. I could not agree more. That would be my exact answer. I look back to my career and I go, wow, why didn't I network more? Why wasn't I more proactive about that? I think I do that now. And I look back and boy, were there some opportunities to just be really intentional about that. Great
Yeah,
advice.
definitely. I mean, I worked with some great people I never maintained contact with, and I kind of regret that.
Yeah, me too. So Mike, you're doing some great things with Napier thriving under employee ownership. What's the next big adventure or challenge that's on the horizon that excites you the most?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I feel like I should say my speed skating career. But my speed skating coach, who won't listen to this, thank goodness, would be laughing if I suggested I had anything close to a career. Um, I think, what I want to do is really build the next generation of the Napier management team. And we've got some great people in the management team. And effectively, what kind of makes me excited is to make myself redundant.
Mm,
I think if we can get people who can do the things I'm doing better than I'm doing,
yeah.
that's got to be the goal. And that's a whole combination of things. That's getting the right people, that's putting them in the right roles, that's getting the right training, that's getting them to meet people outside the agency. I mean, again, the networking thing is super important.
Yeah.
So all of that, to me, I think is the most exciting thing. And then I'll work on speed skating.
In your free time. Yeah, when you're replaced. That's awesome. So good. Well, Mike, we want to get you to your celebrations this evening, your company party. I just want to thank you so much for your time. I will put your information in the show notes. What's the best way to get a hold of you for our listeners?
The easiest way is just to email me. I mean, anyone who's run a small business will know that my email is mike@napierb2b.com. That's Napierb, the number two, the letter B.com. Just email me there.
Okay. We'll make sure that that's in the show notes. Anything else that you'd like to make sure that our listeners know as they move forward and improve their leadership and begin to unleash their skill to lead?
I just like to take my advice of networking. I'm a little late taking it, but if anybody is out there, particularly if they're in the marketing sector or in the tech sector, they want to connect, they want to chat about anything, they want to ask me anything, I'd love to connect. I mean, I think that's one of the things I am trying to do is trying to build that network and use that. So yeah, I'd love to talk to people.
Awesome. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today on Unleashed. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much, Wendi.
Thanks for listening to Unleash with Wendi Swanson. Make sure to subscribe and follow to be notified when the newest episodes of the podcast go live. Please take a moment to rate and review us. It helps others discover Unleashed and join our movement of forward-thinking leaders. You can find contact information and important links in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode, and remember, keep leading with authenticity, embrace change, and choose to live life unleashed.